Welcome to this video on identity management. On the CISSP exam, you are expected to understand identity management implementation, and that is the focus of this video. Now, what is identity? Identity is a subject claiming to be who or what they are. Now, we often think identity being a person or a user, but computer, as discussed in the previous video, can have identities as well. So we use characteristics like hostname, IP address, MAC address, and that is claim of identity for the particular computer. So we will then use authentication to verify or confirm that the identity is indeed correct. So some key terms for this particular video is you need to understand provisioning. Provisioning is the creation of identity and authentication credential for a subject. We often think of provisioning as a creation of computer, such as authentication and things like that. But in terms of identity management, provisioning is about creating that identity and the credential that are associated with that identity so that you can authenticate it. The deprovisioning is just the opposite. We remove those credentials, we expire those credentials, or we expire or delete or remove that identities as well. So we have provisioning and deprovisioning, and again, as I mentioned, authentication is the validation of a subject identity. Just give you an example, I can claim to be the drummer for some famous band, but until you actually see me playing a show, or I am on a record cover, or you see me in a photo opportunity with them, that's when you authenticate the fact that I am really a drummer. In which case I am not, but nonetheless, at least I authenticate as such. Then we have authorization that determines if a subject is permitted to access an object. For example, the drum kit. Am I authorized to play drums for this brand or the stage? I hope not, because I don't believe that I am that good, but that is the difference. The band would know me, they would trust me, and they would say, you are welcome to come and play the drums. This is your job. So this is permitted access to the object, which is my drum kit at that point. And then you have access control, which manage subject privilege to access object. So the access control will control how the subject can interact with different objects. So just to give you an example, we have subjects, whether they are user or it's a script or something like that, and they are wanting to access the website. Well, in this case, you are going to need an identification or authentication manager in order to gain access. The authentication is going to be the password, because only this ID should know their password. And if those things check out, the identity is correct and authentication is correct, then you will be permitted to access to the website. Once you are given access to the website, maybe the access control is you are in a user group where you only get certain privilege to interact with the website. Maybe submit your email address so we can send you letters and so on and so forth. But you are not going to be able to modify anything on the website or any users. You are just keep into this group that has a limited privilege, and that this is your access control level. And once all of those things have been verified, then you will be permitted access to the website. Now there's a different method you need to be familiar with for the exam. Now there's a two type of particular identity management method. One is centralized access control or centralized identity management. However, you want to refer to it, normally how it is referred to is centralized access control, because you are doing identification and authentication and authorization, and you are using single entry to do that. So on the previous diagram, that was centralized access control, we had one identification authentication management server like an Active Directory or LDAP or Radius or something like that, that is doing all of the identification, authentication and authorization for us. Or we can do decentralized access control, which is the identification, authentication, authorization is performed by multiple entities. So we have multiple devices or multiple entities performing this work for us. To give you an idea of what that looks like, here is centralized access control. We have subjects and maybe they want to access this computer up here. Well, in order to do so, they are going to have to identify and authenticate, and then there will be authorized access, some with this computer and same with this computer and same with this website. So if they want to access those things, they have got to go to this central point which controls all the identity, the authentication and the authorization. It manages it all. Now on the decentralized side of things, when you go to log into that computer, you have the identification, authentication management happening right here on the computer. It doesn't go out to a separate server. It handles it on the computer. Same with the computer and the same with the website. So each host or object will have its own identity and access management service locally, and you will see or hear this called local authentication at times. And this is where now we have centralized authentication happening right here. So your centralized identification or authentication happening here, but if that fails for some reason, we have a backup mechanism. We have a decentralized mechanism that will backup us. Now how this is normally deployed is, let's say administrator and root level access, those are all done locally. Your administrator and your root level accounts will all be done locally, decentralized, so that your root password is not stored in that particular system. Whereas your normal user account, just to get general access or general user level access, will be done centrally. So you will authenticate to an Active Directory or LDAP server of some kind, and that's how you will get access. So the bottom line for this video is to know the definition of identity and other key terms we talked about, and also understand centralized and decentralized access controls.